Hey everybody, it's Kristin from Magoosh. Welcome to Tuesday ACT. In today's episode, we are going to talk about ACT scores for the Ivy League. So basically, what are the scores of admitted students and what do Ivy Leagues think of ACT scores versus SAT scores? So if you're watching this, you're probably a pretty highly competitive student and want to be scoring at the top of the range, and so that's good because at the very top of the range, and these are ACT scores for last admissions cycle, we have Harvard. In the middle 50% of accepted applicants scored between a 32 and 35. So middle 50% is what most colleges report. It means that 25% of admitted students scored below this range and 25% scored higher. So that means at Harvard, 25% of admitted students were scoring a 35 or 36, and at least 75% of students were scoring a 32 or higher. So pretty aggressive. Ever so teeny tiny baby step down is Princeton and Yale, who had middle 50% ranges of 31 to 35. At the next tier, if we can even call it, is Columbia, UPenn, and Dartmouth, and their middle 50% were 31 to 34. And then finally we have Brown and Cornell with ranges of 30 to 34. So really we're not talking about a whole huge range of differences. At the top we have Harvard 32 to 35, and at the bottom, again, if we can even say that, 30 to 34. So it's safe to say you need a score in the 30s and hopefully the upper 30s to be competitive at an Ivy League university. Now, here is something that I find really interesting. Here are the average writing scores at pretty much all of these Ivy Leagues, the middle 50%, 8 to 10. Now, this is based on the old ACT scoring system because students who are taking the new ACT essay right now haven't yet applied to colleges, so we don't know what those scores will be. But the old essay was scored out of 12. So you had two graders scoring out of 6 that could add up to 12. So that means these students who were at an 8 got a 4 out of 6 on the essay, and at the top range, or at the top of the middle 50% range, a 5 out of 6 on the essay. That's actually not anywhere close in comparison to the scaled scores we just looked at. Those are all top range. That would be like getting an 11. Those ranges should all be 11 to 12 on the essay if this was comparable. So this is kind of interesting, and what it perhaps indicates is that the optional writing score is perhaps not all that important. We can maybe guess, but if the essay is not your strong suit, you can probably breathe a sigh of relief with these scores. Now, let's just talk about the big question, and that is, do Ivy League universities still privilege the SAT? This has been a myth that has been circulating for a long time. They are all East Coast universities, and for a very long time, most students on the East Coast took the SAT, and the colleges and universities on the East Coast were more familiar with the SAT, and so a lot of students and parents and tutors and counselors think there is a bias against the ACT. I will tell you that has really, for the almost completely most part, 99%, gone away. So I would not worry at all about whether you are taking the ACT or the SAT, because you need to be aiming for such high scores. You should just take the test that you're going to do better on. You're going to be able to get the highest score you possibly can for these schools. Something that is interesting about these schools, though, is that there are still a lot more students submitting SAT than ACT scores at all of them. So even though there are more schools taking more students taking the ACT nationwide, there are more students submitting SAT scores to these schools. That may be because these students still have that bias. It may be for other reasons, but for example, at Harvard, we see that there's 85% of students submitting SAT scores and 35% submitting ACT scores, which of course means that some students are submitting both SAT and ACT, because otherwise the math doesn't quite add up. At Dartmouth, for example, 65% SAT, 35% ACT. So why am I telling you this? Well, if you're being super strategic, and I wouldn't put too much stock in this, but you'll see that you have a smaller pool of applicants that you're competing with ACT scores. So there are some people that think that there's perhaps some fewer competition there, I should say, fewer competition with the students submitting ACT scores over SAT scores, because they're just getting fewer of them. So if that means anything to you, and you should take it with a grain of salt, there's actually maybe a slight advantage to ACT scores at these top schools. If you want help on getting ACT scores that are that high, you can go to act.magoosh.com. We have lots of tips and strategies and practice questions ranging from easy to very, very hard to challenge our top students. And we would love to help you out. And I will see you here next Tuesday, ACT, for some more tips to conquer the ACT.